Can Ukraine win this war without additional U.S. aid?
Winning the war is a high bar, even with aid from the U.S. I think the fact is that most of 2024 is going to be a build year. Being able to mobilize additional troops, retrain troops, stockpile ammunition. Really, you're not going to see major movements on the Ukrainian side until well deep into 2024. But more than likely, they're probably planning ahead to 2025. Is the likely point where we could see some additional movement. I think that's the case for Russia too. Russia is not going to make major headway. It's now fighting for small slivers of land. It's likely to make advances because right now the Russians outmatch the Ukrainians. The Russians are getting support from the Iranians with regards to drones, the North Koreans with regards to artillery, and frankly, the support from the U.S. has fallen off. Now the West is plugging some holes. Europe is plugging some holes, providing some additional resources. It's stepping up in a big way, but nothing could fill the gap of the absence of the U.S. The U.S. is the arsenal of democracy. So in terms of winning, that is just a very, very high bar. What we could expect the Ukrainians to do is to hold what they have with some rollbacks from the Russians, and then build for an offensive later down the road. That's more the most likely scenario.
There's new leadership in the armed forces in Ukraine, thanks to President Zelensky. Lieutenant Colonel, I wonder if you think that improves or hurts conditions on the battlefield. Reporting suggests that Ukrainian soldiers are not the biggest fans.
Yeah, it's probably not going to have a disastrous effect, but it's not going to necessarily have a positive effect. The biggest impact of the change is that the president of Ukraine is entitled to pick his military leaders. Zelensky didn't quite deliver the way that Zelensky didn't quite deliver the way Zelensky needed him to, and frankly, Zelensky was becoming quite popular, and that was a difficult position for the president to be in. So he switched out to a more favorable, more frankly, a more trustworthy military brass. Now, in terms of the effects on the ground, fundamentally things don't really change that much. Ukraine is still suffering a reduction in artillery. Ukraine is getting slowly outmatched in regards to drones. Syrskyi doesn't have the best reputation amongst the frontline troops and the brigade commanders. He has some, unfortunately, his reputation in a lot of ways is built on the bloodshed that Ukraine suffered around Bakhmut, suffering somewhere in the ballpark of 20,000 casualties. So I think that doesn't endear him to the troops. But actually, as a matter of fact, I think it's bigger than that. It's the fact that Zelensky, the outgoing commander, actually was quite popular. So these are issues that are going to be worked through, but it's not going to have a major impact on the war anytime in the near future. I think, like I said, this 2024 is going to be mainly a build year to conduct a counteroffensive down the road.
Well, I wonder what 2024, though, will be for Russia in the eyes of Vladimir Putin. He, of course, as I'm sure you're well aware, Lieutenant Colonel, did an interview with Tucker Carlson on the Tucker Carlson network and talked about conditions for negotiations potentially to bring this thing to an end. Take a listen.
What we are conveying to the U.S. leadership, if you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it. And then we can agree on some terms.
And as we do have questions about to what extent the U.S. will be providing additional weapons or anything else, is the U.S. effectively sending a signal to Putin if this does not pass, that maybe it is time to think about end stages here?
Well, I think the fact is it's out of the U.S. hands. The Ukrainians started this war basically on their own. They didn't get any support whatsoever. Frankly, modest support in the first 4 months. They had some anti-tank systems, limited man-pad surface-to-air missile systems. They did that on their own. They're back kind of at square one with regards to U.S. support. That's almost all falling off now because of we've expended the funds that were allocated by Congress. Europe is stepping up. Europe is actually providing some additional resources, not in the quantity that's required. But there is no ending this war anytime in the near future. The Ukrainians are not willing to sacrifice the people that are subjected to Russian oppression in occupied territory. the commentary from Vladimir Putin is actually pretty absurd if you think about it. U.S. is not providing aid to Ukraine at the moment, and the war is not ending. The Ukrainians are making do. The Ukrainians are actually holding ground, conducting minor counterattacks and things of that nature. So there's no real easy way to end this war. And as for Tucker Carlson, it should be a pretty embarrassing moment for him. Certainly, he's catering to our enemies, catering to the enemies of the United States, and feeding the beast with regards to the extreme elements of the Republican Party, and that is something, a shame that he's going to have to live with going forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you, the Trump factor is in the air here. We're talking about arriving at an agreement here on a funding deal to get through the rest of this year. But if Donald Trump became the next president of the United States, there are real questions about the direction this would take. Of course, he says he could stop this war in 24 hours. It's something that I asked Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova, about yesterday in our interview, and I was struck by her answer, Lieutenant Colonel. Let's listen to what she said and have you respond.
We have to thank Donald Trump for providing us first javelins. It was Donald Trump's administration, and I was the Minister of Finance then, worked a lot with the administration. The decision on the lethal aid to Ukraine was taken by Donald Trump and his people.
Alexander Vindman, as somebody who was on the so-called perfect call with Donald Trump and President Zelensky, what's your reaction?
I mean, yes, in fact, our javelins were released to Ukraine in the Trump administration. This was a national security endeavor that was some time coming. There was a push from the national security apparatus under the Obama administration to release those weapons. Under the leadership of H.R. McMaster, the national security advisor for Trump, that decision was made. I would say that President Trump played basically no role in that. I understand what Ambassador Makarova is saying here. She's trying to thread the needle, figure out if there's a way to claw back some sort of relationship with Trump world, with MAGA wing of the Republican Party.
Would he be a trusted ally to Ukraine?
No, it's a fool's errand. It's a fool's errand to try to think that there's some way to ingratiate back with Trump. Trump is notoriously vindictive. He fired me because I reported his corruption. It was behind closed doors in official channels. It ended up becoming public and resulting in his impeachment. But I was fired days after he was acquitted by the Senate. There is no way to claw back a relationship for Ukraine. And frankly, more importantly for Donald Trump is the fact that he cheerleads for Vladimir Putin. He's a fan of Vladimir Putin, the way Vladimir Putin wields power. So I think the Ukrainians are still not quite sure how to manage the fact that half of the political establishment in the United States is anti-Ukraine. Certainly the extreme elements of are, but they're doing the best they can. They're trying to preserve relationships, and that's what diplomats do.